help yourself, buddy. Is it pronounced Adriana?
When it comes out.
With a B. Adriana? I thought that was your little boy, son.
No, that's my
That
brother.
was your brother. He was a beauty now. What's his name?
Raymond.
Raymond, like everybody loves.
Yes.
Good evening. It's good to be with all of you here tonight.
Your mic's not on, I think.
Let's pray and then we'll get started with our Songs and Scriptures service.
Mic's not on.
The mic's not on?
Now,
Oh, okay. I just need to go closer. Got it. Okay. So let's pray. Most merciful God, we thank you for this day that you've given to us. We thank you for all the blessings that you pour out into our lives. We thank you for this night and for these friends that we can gather together with. We pray that we glorify your name tonight, God, and that your message will be heard through these songs and through these stories as well, God. Thank you for everything. In your name we pray. Amen. Well, we're going to start out tonight with a story. And this is that story. For years now, whenever Christmas pageants are talked about in a certain little town in the Midwest, someone is sure to mention the name of Wallace Purley. Wally's performance in one annual production of the Nativity play has slipped into the realm of legend. But the old-timers who were in the audience that night never tire of recalling exactly what happened. Wally was 9 that year and in 2nd grade, though he should have been in 4th. Most people in town knew that he had difficulty in keeping up. He was big and clumsy, slow in movement and mind. Still, Wally was well liked by the other children in his class, all of whom were smaller than he, though the boys had trouble hiding their irritation when the uncoordinated Wally would ask to play ball with them. Most often, they'd find a way to keep him off the field. But Wally would hang around anyways, not sulking, just hoping. He was always a helpful boy, a willing and smiling one, and the natural protector, paradoxically, of the underdog. Sometimes, if the older boys chased the younger ones away, it would always be Wally who'd say, "Can't they stay? They're no bother." Wally fancied the idea of being a shepherd with a flute in the Christmas pageant that year, but the play's director, Miss Lombard, assigned him to a more important role. After all, she reasoned, the innkeeper did not have too many lines, and Wally's size would make his refusal of lodging to Joseph more forceful. And so it happened that the usual large partisan audience gathered for the town's Yuletide extravaganza of the crooks and creches of beards, crowns, halos, and a whole stage full of squeaky voices. No one on stage or off was more caught up in the magic of the night than Wallace Purley. They said later that he stood on the wings and watched the performance with such fascination that from time to time, Miss Lombard had to make sure he didn't wander on stage before his cue. Then the time came when Joseph appeared, slowly, tenderly, guiding Mary to the door of the inn. Joseph knocked hard on the wooden door set into the painted backdrop. Wally, the innkeeper, was there waiting. "What do you want?" Wally said, swinging the door open with a brusque gesture. "We seek lodging." "Seek it elsewhere." Wally looked straight ahead but spoke vigorously. "The inn is filled." "Sir, we have asked everywhere in vain. We have traveled far and are very weary. There is no room in the inn for you." Wally looked properly stern. "Please, good innkeeper, this is my wife, Mary. She is heavy with child and needs a place to rest. Surely you must have some small corner for her. She is so tired." Now, for the first time, the innkeeper relaxed his stiff stance and looked down at Mary. With that, there was a long pause, long enough to make the audience a bit tense with embarrassment. "No, be gone," the prompter whispered from the wings. "No," Wally repeated automatically. "Be gone." Joseph sadly placed his arm around Mary, and the two of them started to move away. The innkeeper did not return inside his inn, however. Wally stood there in the doorway, watching the forlorn couple. His mouth was open, his brow creased with concern, his eyes filling unmistakably with tears. And suddenly, this Christmas pageant became a different one from all others. "Don't go, Joseph," Wally called out. "Bring Mary back." And Wallace Furling's face grew into a bright smile. "You can have my room." Some people in town thought that the pageant had been ruined. Yet there were others, many, many others, who considered it the most Christmassy of all Christmas pageants they had ever seen. Alrighty, so now we are going to sing some hymns. We have hymn books on the table all around us. If you will pick one up, and you can just tell us what hymn you would like us to sing, and we'll do our best to know it, Brother Paul.
Just so long as it's not Old Canada.
Yeah. Well, one of our Christmas hymns, preferably. Yeah, 173, Joy to the World, will be our first hymn.
I told my daughter for Christmas, I said, gotta get that Christmas book out.
Joy to the world, the Lord is come. Let earth receive her King. Let every heart prepare him room. And heaven and nature sing, and heaven and nature sing, and heaven and nature sing. Joy to the world, the Savior brings. Let men their songs employ, while fields and floods, rocks, hills, and plains repeat the sounding joy, repeat the sounding joy, repeat the sounding joy. No more let sin and sorrow grow, nor thorns infest the ground. He comes to make his blessings flow, far as the curse is found, far as the curse is found, far as the curse is found. He moves the world with truth and grace, and makes the nations prove the glories of his righteousness, and wonders of his love, and wonders of his love, and wonders of his love. 202. We three kings of Orient are, bearing gifts we travel so far. Field and fountain,
Let's do Kay and then Bob, and then we'll do a couple more songs.
Is it labeled by that?
Hopefully I can see this, you guys. Christmas is for love.
You're gonna have to go closer.
Closer. Christmas is for love. It's for joy, for giving, for sharing, laughter. Thank you. For reuniting with family and friends, tinsel and brightly decorated packages. But mostly, Christmas is for love. I had not believed this until a small elf-like student with wide, innocent eyes, soft, rosy cheeks, gave me a wondrous Christmas gift. Mark was an 11-year-old orphan who lived with his aunt, a bitter, middle-aged, greatly annoyed with the burden of caring for her dead sister's son. And she never failed to remind Mark that he was an annoyance. Mark, young Mark, if it hadn't been for her generosity, he would be a vagrant, homeless wag. Still, with all the scolding and childlessness at home, he was a sweet and gentle child. I had not noticed Mark in particular until he began staying after school each day as a task of arousing his aunt's anger. I later found out to help me straighten the room, and we did this quietly and comfortably, not speaking much, but enjoying the solitude of that hour. When we did talk, Mark spoke mostly of his mother. Though he was quite small when she died, he remembered a kind, loving, gentle mom. When the days passed, I look forward to his coming. When the days passed, he continued to scamper hurriedly from room to room after class. I stopped him one afternoon and asked why he no longer helped me in the room. He had quit helping her. I told him how much I had missed him, and his large gray eyes lit up eagerly, and he replied, "Did you really miss me?" I explained how he had been my best helper. "I was making you a surprise," he whispered confidentially, "or is for Christmas." And with that, he became embarrassed and dashed home. He didn't stay after school anymore after that. Finally came the last day of school before Christmas. Mark crept slowly into the room that late afternoon with his hands concealing something behind his back. "I have your present," he replied. He said timidly when I looked up, "I hope you like it." He held out his hands, and there, lying in his small palms, was a tiny wooden box. "It's beautiful, Mark. Is there something in it?" I asked, opening the box to look in. "Oh, you can't see what's in it," he replied. "And you can't touch it or taste it or feel it. But Mother said it always makes you feel good all the time, warm on cold nights and safe when you're all alone." I gazed into the empty box. "What is it, Mark?" I asked gently, "that will make me feel so good?" "It's love," he whispered softly, "and Mother always said it's best when you give it away." And he turned and quietly left the room. So now I keep the small box, crudely made of scraps of wood, on the piano in my living room, and only a smile as inquiring friends raise quizzically eyebrows when I explain to him that there's love in it. Yes, Christmas is for gaiety and song and for good and wondrous gifts, but mostly Christmas is for love.
Good. Good job.
she always picks on me, so it's nothing new. This is A Wonderful Life by Jimmy Stewart, and no, it's not Jimmy Stewart, the race car driver. It's Jimmy Stewart, the actor, who was in all the hundreds of westerns.
I love that movie. It's a wonderful life. It's a wonderful life.
It's a Wonderful Life, Jimmy Stewart, December 1987. A friend told me recently that seeing a movie I made more than 40 years ago is a holiday tradition in his family, like putting up a Christmas tree. That movie is A Wonderful Life, and out of all the 80 films I've made, it's my favorite, but it has an odd history. When the war was over in 1945, I came back home to California from 3 years of service in the Air Force. I had been away from the film business, my MGM contract had run out, and frankly, not knowing how to get started again, I was just a little bit scared. Hank Fonda was in the same boat, and we sort of wandered around talking flying kites and stuff, but nothing much was happening. Then one day, Frank Capra phoned me. The great director had also been away in the service, making the Why We Fight documentary series for the military, and he admitted to be a little frightened too. But we had a movie in mind. He had a movie in mind. We met in his office to talk about it. He said the idea came from a Christmas story written by Philip Van Doren Stem. Stem couldn't sell the story anywhere, but he finally had the 140-page pamphlets printed up at his own expense, and he sent them to his friends as greeting cards. Now listen, Frank began hesitantly. He seemed a little embarrassed about what he was going to say. The story starts in heaven, and it's sort of the Lord telling somebody to go down to earth because there's a fellow who's in trouble, and this heavenly being goes to a small town, and Frank swallowed and took a deep breath. Well, what it boils down to is this. The fellow who thinks he's a failure in life jumps off a bridge. The Lord sends down an angel named Clarence, who hasn't earned his wings yet. And Clarence jumps into the water to save the guy, but the angel can't swim. So the guy has to save him, and then Bedford Falls had, Bedford Falls had, I think this is out of sequence, Sam.
It changed to be called Potterville. That was the story.
It's kind of coincidence. Church I went to down in Texas was Cornerstone. But it's Baptist church. I'm going back there this coming Sunday. So, got a bunch of friends down there.
All right, I'm sorry. Jumped ahead of myself.
I won't be here Sunday because I'm going down, we're leaving Saturday morning.
All right,
I'm going down there and go see my brother, he's not doing very good.
Frank stopped and wiped his brow. This doesn't tell very well, does it? Well, I did a good job of messing it up like Frank did.
He had COVID.
I jumped up, Frank, if you want me to do a picture about a guy who jumps off a bridge and an angel named Clarence, who hadn't won his wings yet, coming down to save him, well, I'm your man. Production of It's a Wonderful Life started April 15, 1946. And from the beginning, there was a certain something special about the film. Even the set was special. 2 months had been spent creating the town of Bedford Falls. For the winter scenes, the special effects department invented a new kind of realistic snow instead of using the traditional white cornflakes. As one of the longest American movie sets ever made until then, Bedford Falls had 75 stores and buildings with 4 acres with a 3-block main street lined with 20 full-grown oak trees. As I walked down the shady street the morning we started work, it reminded me of my hometown, Indiana, Pennsylvania. I almost expected to hear the bells of the Presbyterian church, where Mother played the organ and Dad sang in the choir. I chuckled, remembering how the fire siren would go off, and Dad, a volunteer fireman, would slip out of the choir loft. It was a false alarm. If it was a false alarm, Dad would sneak back and sort of give a nod to everyone to assure them that none of their houses was in danger. I remember how I got started in pictures. Dad, who came to California for a visit, asked, well, where do you go to church around here? Well, I stammered, I haven't been going, that's nothing. There's none around here. Dad disappeared and came back with 4 men. You must not look very hard, Jim, he said, because there's a Presbyterian church just 3 blocks from here. And these are the elders. They're building a new building now, and I told them you were a movie star and you would help them. And so Brentwood Presbyterian was the first church I belonged to out here. Later, that church was the one that was Gloria and I were married. A few years after that, it was the same church I'd slip into during the day when Gloria was near death after our twin girls were born. Then after we moved, we attended Beverly Hills Presbyterian, a church we could walk to. It wasn't the elaborate movie set, however, that made its wonderful life so different. As much of it was the story. The character I played was George Bailey, an ordinary kind of fella who thinks he never accomplished anything in life. His dreams of becoming a famous architect, of traveling the world and living adventurously, have not been fulfilled. Instead, he feels trapped in a humdrum job in a small town. And when faced with a crisis in which he feels he has failed everyone, he breaks under the strain and flees to the bridge. That's when his guardian angel, Clarence, comes down on Christmas Eve to show him what his community would be like without him. The angel takes him back through his life to show how ordinary, everyday efforts are really big achievements. Clarence reveals how George Bailey's loyalty to his job at the building and loan office had saved families and homes, how his little kindness had changed the lives of others, and how ripples of his love spread through the world, helping make it a better place. As good as the script was, there was still something else about the movie that made it different. It's hard to explain. I, for one, had things happen to me during the filming that never happened in any other picture I've made. In one scene, for example, George Bailey is faced with unjust criminal charges and not knowing where to turn, ends up at a little roadside restaurant. He is unaware that most of the people in the town are arduously praying for him. In this scene, at the lowest point in George Bailey's life, Frank Capra was shooting a long shot as he slumped in despair. In agony, I raised my eyes and following the script pled, God, dear Father in heaven, I'm a praying man, but if you're up there and you can hear me, show me the way. I'm at the end of the road. Show me the way, God. As I said those words, I felt the loneliness, the hopelessness of people who had nowhere to turn, and my eyes filled with tears. I broke down sobbing. This was not planned at all, but the power of that prayer, the realization that our Father in heaven is there to help the hopeless, had reduced me to tears. Frank, who loved spontaneity in his films, was ecstatic. He wanted a close-up of me saying the prayer, but he was sensitive enough to know that my breaking down was real and that repeating it in another take was unlikely. But Frank got his close-up anyway. The following week, he worked long hours in the film laboratory, again and again enlarging the frames of the scene so that eventually it would appear as a close-up on the screen. I believe nothing like this had ever happened before. It involved thousands of individual enlargements and extra time and money, but he felt it was worth it. There was a growing excitement among us all as we worked day and night throughout the early summer of 1946. We threw everything we had into our work. Finally, after 3 months and shooting some 68 miles of 35mm film, we completed the filming and had a big wrap-up party for everyone. It was an outdoor picnic and 3-legged races and burlap bag sprints, just at the picnic back home in Pennsylvania. At the outing, Frank talked enthusiastically about the picture. He felt that the film, as well as the actors, would be up for the Academy Awards. Both of us wanted it to win, not only because we believed in the message, but also because the reassurance we needed in a time of starting over. But life doesn't always work out the way we want it to. The movie came out in December 1946, and from the beginning we could tell it was not going to be the success we had hoped for. The critics had mixed reactions. Some liked it, a human drama of essential truth, and others felt it too sentimental. a figment of simple Pollyanna platitudes. As more reviews came out, our hopes sank lower and lower. During early February 1947, 8 other current films, including Sinbad the Sailor and Betty Grable's The Shocking Miss Pilgrim, outranked us in box office income. The post-war public seemed to prefer lighthearted fare. At the end of 1947, It's a Wonderful Life ranked 27th in earnings among other releases that season. And although it earned several Oscar nominations, and despite our hopes, it won nothing. Best Picture for 1946 went to the best years of our lives. By the end of 1947, the film was quietly put on the shelf. But a curious thing happened. The movie simply refused to stay on the shelf. Those who loved it a lot, and they must have told others, they wouldn't let it die any more than the angel Clarence would let George Bailey die.
That's right.
When it began to be shown on television, a whole new audience fell in love with it. Today, after some 40 years, I've heard the film called an American cultural phenomenon. Well, maybe so, but it seems to me that there's nothing phenomenal about the movie itself. It's simply about an ordinary man who discovers that living each ordinary day honorably with faith in God and selfless concern for others can make a truly wonderful life.
Seemed like you ought to ring a bell. You ought to ring a
I told
bell.
my face rings a bell, but
Ring a bell and the angel gets his wings, they say. Goes with that story.
We're down there when I'm going to church Sunday. There's a couple. My dog, her
165.
lady friend's 70th birthday and his lady friend's 80th birthday. And they had to get a celebration together. And this couple was down there and both of them looked like a
You said
family
165.
members they haven't seen for some time.
Sure.
I have no idea what 160.
It's Emmanuel.
I wanna see 191 sometime.
I
said, was I gonna sing?
Well, you would, I'll be back next Monday, we'll be back Monday. I don't know about. Drive down. Rather than go to church and Sunday. But, lunch after the church service, just need to come home.
As we were walking, I started choking on the
We'll be back Monday.
I don't know how to talk with these things, on, whoops, this is a little low for me. That's better. When I met my friend on the crowded street that day, she held out her hand to me and she said, I just hope you can help me. I'm desperate. And wearily, she explained, I'm about to cry and it's all over a doll. I simply have to find this doll. It's for my granddaughter. Tears filled her eyes, and I remember the terrible shock that we had all felt over the death of her daughter, who had been born such a vivacious young mother until stricken several months before. The young husband was doing a fine job with the little girl, but was on the grandmother that much of the burden of planning for good things remained. And this explained her Christmas errand. I blame myself entirely, she told me. I just should have started earlier. I never thought it'd be a problem to find one special doll. Yet, there is not one of this variety left in this town. I settled and asked her, well, why can't you just settle for just some other kind of doll? And she shook her head, no. One of the last things that my daughter ever said to me before the pain got so bad was how that she had refused to buy that doll for her little girl. She told me she had thought the child was too young for such a doll, and she had refused to buy it for her birthday, supposing there was going to be lots of other occasions ahead and she could get it for her. And then she told the rest of the story. The little girl had come to the mother's bedside and asked whether the doll might come at Christmas time. The young mother grasped the tiny little hand in hers and said, I promise you this, that you'll get it this Christmas. And then she asked her own mother to do this one thing. Would you just make sure that my little girl gets that doll this Christmas? Now, my friend was just about to fail in her mission. It's all my fault, she kept repeating. I just waited too late. It just will take a miracle now for her to get that doll. Secretly, I agreed. I tried to keep up a polite facade of courage. Maybe the child's forgotten all about it, and she'll just be happy with just any little old thing you can get her. Maybe just something else. Grimly, my friend said, she may forget, but I won't. We parted to go our separate ways, and my mind was only half on that shopping. I found the ribbon that a neighbor had wanted me to finish a baby blanket for her, and she was making. A few minutes later, I stopped at her door to leave the package, and I was invited to come inside. Her two little girls sat on the floor playing with their dolls. As I sat down, I noticed that one of the dolls was the same type that my friend was seeking. Hopefully, I asked, can you remember where you bought that doll? My friend gave me a warm-hearted smile. That's not a doll, she said. She's a member of the family now. Sometimes dolls get that way, don't they? And as near as I can see, she probably was born and not made. She came to us by an airplane from a favorite aunt who lives out east. I told her I had a friend who was searching frantically for such a doll for the little girl whose mother had passed away that year. Apparently unaware of us, the two children played happily. The mother and I spoke in adult words. facing loss at holiday time and how much we wished that we could help my friends. And later, when I got up to leave, the two little girls followed me to the door. "Dolly's ready to leave now too," they told me. Sure enough, she was dressed in a red velveteen coat and a hat with a white fur muff. "Where's Dolly going?" I asked. They just laughed happily. "She's going with you, of course. You know, where that lady lives, don't you know? The one who needs a doll so bad." I started to tell them that, of course, I couldn't take their doll. Then I looked at their little faces, happy in the moment of giving. If I say the wrong thing now, something within my heart warned, I may ruin their joy of giving for the rest of their lives. Silently, I took the little doll. I was fumbling with my car keys so they wouldn't see the mist and the tears that had come into my eyes. And their mother said, "Are y'all both sure that y'all want to do this?" They answered, yes, we do." The mother put her arms around both of them tenderly. Later, I rang the doorbell of my friend and I said, "Don't ask me how, but I got this doll. I can't talk about it just yet. The doll's a little smudgy, but the worn places are from kisses. Maybe they won't show under the Christmas lights." My friend cuddled the doll as though it was made of precious metal. Tears of joy welled up in her eyes when I finally was able to tell her the story. "How can I ever thank those children enough?" she asked. "They've already received a blessing greater than anything you or I could give them," I told her. "I saw their little faces when they offered me the doll to bring to you." And it was true. In the moment of giving, they had also received, in ways past our finding out. A miracle had taken place. A promise could be kept. Linking here with there in the eternal circle of love in which the great gift of Christmas itself is a part.
I know Sam, my brother and I usually run over to my town and wait. He's got 5 of them. And my sister was telling me, saw Crystal the other day and said, "You bet he didn't live over 130 now. He lost that much weight." He just,
The manger was empty. Can y'all hear me? Okay. We arrived early on Christmas morning to give the church a thorough inspection, noting with approval that the aisles and seats had been swept and dusted after the midnight Christmas Eve service. Any lost purses, Bibles, and gloves had been collected and sent to the office where the lost and found box was kept. Every forgotten flyer and bulletin insert had been rounded up and discarded. Outside, it was just beginning to glow light. In the church, where only the pastor moved, candles flickered and threw shifting shadows on the arches and the stone floor. Occasionally, stray candlelight picked out the rich colors in the stained glass windows. It was cold, and except for the pastor's slow tread, it was silent. He paused beside the almost life-sized nativity scene to say a Christmas prayer of thanksgiving to the one whose birth was being celebrated. The figures, each lovingly crafted with wonderful realism, sat on a small stage. A night sky and the star that had led the shepherds and the wise men to the Messiah on the day of his birth could be seen through the open door of the stable. The shepherds were just entering, eyes wide in obvious awe. Various kinds of livestock stood installed or lay on the edges of the scene, and in the center was the Holy Family. Looking at the manger scene, the pastor could almost feel the reverence of that night long ago. Slowly, pastor began to search the church. Starting by the manger, he peered back through the aisles, nearly crawling on his hands and knees to see all the way under each seat. But there was nothing. Next, he called the custodian, thinking he may have seen the figure of the infant Jesus. He called the assistant pastor and all the elders, but no one had any explanation. In the end, each shaking his head sorrowfully, they accepted the truth they had all been trying to avoid. The figure could not have been mislaid or lost. It must have been stolen. With solemnity befitting the occasion, the pastor reported the theft to the congregation that assembled not long after. His voice trembled as he told them what he had found earlier that morning. For a person to steal the very symbol of their reason for celebrating, he said, their very reason for hope, well, he just did not understand. His glaze swept over the faces in the early morning congregation, disappointed to think someone in his own congregation might do such a thing. The figure of the Christ child, he said, must be returned before this Christmas day is over. No one will ask any questions, but it must be brought back immediately. Then he slipped from the pulpit, and the choir closed the service with a Christmas hymn. "O come, let us adore him." The manger remained empty throughout the day. Toward the end of the afternoon, discouraged and heavy-hearted, the pastor took a walk through the wintry streets of the neighborhood. Ahead of him, he saw one of the youngest members of his flock, a 6-year-old boy named Tommy. Bundled shabbily against the cold, Tommy trudged up the sidewalk, proudly dragging behind him a toy express wagon. It was bright and red and obviously Christmas new. Knowing what sacrifice and scrimping the purchase of this toy must have meant, Tommy's family could barely make ends meet. The pastor was deeply touched. The love Tommy's parents had for their little boy gave the pastor's heart a gentle warmth, and he felt his faith in human nature beginning to return. He sped up so he could wish Tommy a Merry Christmas and admired the beautiful new wagon. But as he drew nearer, he saw that the wagon was not empty. There lay the baby Jesus, now wrapped and blanketed, but not quite hidden. The pastor crouched down beside Tommy, one knee feeling the damp snow through his pant leg. His face was grim and disappointed. Tommy may be just a little boy, and one must take allowances, of course, but he was still old enough to understand that stealing was very wrong. The pastor made this crystal clear to Tommy while the little boy stood, his seemingly guiltless, clear eyes filling with what the pastor was sure were pertinent tears. "But pastor," the small boy quavered, when at last the man stopped talking, "I didn't steal Jesus. It wasn't like that at all." He paused to swallow hard and wipe a few tears away. "It's just that I've been asking him for a red wagon as a Christmas present for a long time. And I promised him that when I got it, I'd take him out for the first ride."
Melody, go ahead and read yours, and then we'll close with one song. I know some may need to go ahead and slip out. I'm sorry, we're running a little bit behind, but this last story is a good one too.
The Ivory and the Gold Tablecloth. At Christmas time, men and women everywhere gathered in the churches to wonder anew the greatest miracle the world has ever known. But the story I like best to recall was not a miracle, not exactly. It happened to a pastor who was very young. His church was very old. Once long ago it had flourished. Famous men had preached from the pulpit, prayed before its altar. Rich and poor alike worshipped there and built it beautifully. Now the good days had passed from the section of town where it stood. But the pastor and his young wife believed in their rundown church. They felt that with paint, hammer, and faith, they could get that thing into shape. Together they went to work. But late in December, a severe storm whipped through the river valley, and the worst blow fell on the little church. A huge chunk of rain-soaked plaster fell out of the inside wall just behind the altar. Sorrowfully, the pastor and his wife swept away the mess, but they couldn't hide the ragged hole. The pastor looked at it and had to remind himself quickly, "They will be done." Then his wife wept. Christmas is only 2 days away. That afternoon, the dispirited couple attended the auction held for the benefit of a youth group. The auctioneer opened a box and shook out of its bulk a handsome golden ivory lace tablecloth. It was a magnificent item, nearly 15 feet long, but it too dated from a long vanished era. Who today would have such use for such a thing? There are a few half-hearted bids. Then the pastor was seized with what he thought was a great idea. He bid it for $6.50. He carried the cloth back to the church and tacked it up on the wall behind the altar. It completely hid the hole! And the extraordinary beauty of its shimmering handwork cast a fine holiday glow over the chancel. It was a great triumph. Happily, he went back to preparing his Christmas sermon. Just before noon on the day of Christmas Eve, as the pastor was opening the church, he noticed a woman standing in the cold at the bus stop. "The bus will be here for 40 minutes, he called, and invited her into the church to get warm. He told him that she had come from the city that morning to be interviewed for a job as governess to the children of one of the wealthy families in town, but she had been turned down. A war refugee, her English was imperfect. The woman sat down in a pew and chafed her hands and rested. After a while, she dropped her head and prayed. She looked up at the pastor. She looked up as the pastor began to adjust the great ivory and gold lace cloth across the pole. She rose suddenly and walked up the steps of the chancel. She looked at the tablecloth. Pastor smiled and started to tell her about the storm damage, but she didn't seem to listen. She took off a fold of the cloth and rubbed it between her fingers. "It is mine," she said. "It's my banquet cloth." She lifted the corner and showed the surprised pastor. There were the initials monogrammed on it. "My husband had the cloth made specially for me in Brussels. There could not be another like it." For the next few minutes, the woman and the pastor talked excitedly together. She explained that she was Viennese, that she and her husband had opposed the Nazis and decided to leave the country. They were advised to go separately. Her husband put her on a train for Switzerland. They planned that he would join her as soon as he could arrange to ship their household goods across the border. She never saw him again. Later, she heard that he had died in a concentration camp. "I have always felt it was my fault to live without him," she said. "Perhaps these years of wandering have been my punishment." The pastor tried to comfort her and urged her to take the cloth with her. She refused. Then she went away. As church began to fill on Christmas Eve, it was clear that the cloth was going to be a great success. It had been skillfully designed to look its best by candlelight. After the service, the pastor stood in the doorway. Many people told him that the church looked beautiful. One gentle-faced, middle-aged man, he was a local clock and watch repairman, looked rather puzzled. "It is strange," he said in a soft accent. "Many years ago, my wife, God rest her, and I owned such a cloth in our home in Vienna. My wife put it on the table," here he smiled, "only when the bishop came to dinner." The pastor suddenly became very excited. He told the jeweler about the woman who had been at the church earlier in the day. The startled jeweler crunched the pastor's arm. "Can it be? Is she alive?" Together, the two got in touch with the family who had interviewed her. Then, at the pastor's car, they started for the city. And as Christmas Day was born, this man and his wife, who had been separated through so many saddened Yuletides, were reunited. To all who hear the story, the joyful purpose of the storm that knocked a hole in the wall of the church was now quite clear. Of course, the people said it was a miracle, and I think you would agree it was the season for it.
Let's close singing Silent Night.
Yes. Yes, so turn to 171, Silent Night. You all are dismissed. Have a great night.